Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Science Bridge webinar series. Because today we are going to discuss with my guest, Eugene Foxen, his role and currently what he's doing. So welcome, Eugene.
Thank you very much, Martina, and thank you for the invite.
No, it's my absolute pleasure. I think you have a lot of great insights for our listeners and viewers. And I think your path is going to be very, very informative for everybody. So let's start maybe with your beginnings in South Africa. I know that you're not from South Africa, and I know that you are a pharmacist by training, but your role currently is as the medical information specialist in Novartis. So can you tell us how your path turned out to be here in South Africa?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Martina. And also, I just want to say thank you to the Science Bridge team for the opportunity. I think you guys are doing fantastic work. I think you're doing important work. So just to give you a brief outline of the journey that I've taken from, when I started out to where I am right now, which is at Novartis as the medical information specialist. So you correctly stated that I was actually born and raised in Zimbabwe, a neighboring country to South Africa. And I was always really interested in science, and I was always really interested in making a contribution to the society that I was in. So that sort of spurred the decision of going into pharmacy, right? So I did my pharmacy undergraduate at the University of the Western Cape in Cape Town, and then went on to do a postgraduate degree in medicinal chemistry, right? And thereafter, I had quite a unique experience doing my master's. It was really, really amazing. I enjoyed it. It was fantastic. But there was one specific incident that really spurred my decision to go into industry. And that's sort of what started the journey of me, trying to step into the pharmaceutical industry space. I was successful. I started out as a regulatory affairs pharmacist at what is called a generic pharmaceutical company in Cape Town. I spent 2 years there, and it really set the foundation for me to, step out into other roles within the industry. And after I had learned so much in that space and really built a lot of really great relationships there, I then decided to make a change and move from the generics pharmaceutical space into the innovator space, which is when I got the opportunity at Novartis. So I started at Novartis as a regulatory affairs pharmacist, and then from there sort of spent a little bit of time and then moved into the medical space, which is where I am currently now. And my role is in specifically the medical information space within the medical department. So this has sort of been an overall of, where I've been, what I've done, and yeah.
No, that sounds like quite a journey that you did, because it's switching between roles and it's also going away, I would think, a bit from your education. So let's start from the beginning. You came to South Africa and you wanted to study pharmacy. What were the good and the bad points? What was the difficulty maybe here in South Africa for you?
Sure, absolutely. So I think during my undergraduate studies, the obvious challenges come up of just, a culture shock. Obviously, it's a different environment, it's different languages, etc. But I think that initial challenge really turned out to be one of the biggest advantages or the biggest learnings for myself, because I think the ability to be agile and to be able to adapt and interact with different kinds of people has been something that has been invaluable to me as a person, but also as a professional. So I think that was on the onset, the first kind of big sort of challenge, if you'd like to call it, but I don't really think it was that. Beyond that, I think one of the most important challenges that I faced was the conundrum of the possibility of not being able to work as a pharmacist in South Africa. And I think a lot of foreign individuals who come and study in South Africa are faced with this, because I think there's a bit of a barrier in moving from from your studies into the workspace, especially as a foreigner. And I think the main challenge there is that there's a lot of requirements in terms of the visas that you need to legally work in South Africa. So I was confronted with this right after my undergraduate degree, because as a pharmacist, the requirement is that before you can actually register as a pharmacist, you need to be able or you need to have completed something called community service, which takes about a year after your studies. So I couldn't do that at the time because there were a couple of treaties that South Africa had signed regionally to say that countries within the Southern African region will not poach each other's healthcare professionals, and this extends to doctors, pharmacists, nurses, etc. And it's quite understandable, right? Because obviously this region is quite short-staffed, with those professionals. So right from the onset, that was my challenge. And I really had to network a lot and to speak to a lot of people to really understand, the landscape in terms of what the challenge meant for me, number one, and how I can work around this or think about this in terms of what it means for me. So that was the first real challenge that I faced. And I imagine a lot of, healthcare professionals or even just professionals who are not from South Africa, who want to work here and to contribute here, do face this challenge. So how did I get around it? So, I mean, the first thing was I needed a little bit more time, right, to sort of process the challenge. So I kind of took that as a cue to further my studies while I tried to figure out how to get around this. And this is what inspired the master's that I completed at the University of the Western Cape. The time I spent there was tremendous. I mean, I learned so much, I grew so much. I think research has got more to teach beyond just the academics. I learned about perseverance. I learned how to write because I didn't know how well, I thought I knew, but I learned how to really write, which was fantastic. But I think what the master's experience gave to me was firstly time to think about what I wanted to do, and what kind of contribution I wanted to make in South Africa specifically. But also what it did was it gave me an opportunity to network with a lot of people who are in a similar space, and to try and get ideas of what can I do with what I have. And I eventually stumbled upon the knowledge of what is now called a critical skills visa. Back then it was called an exceptional skills visa. And I basically used my master's research to motivate and to demonstrate that the skills that I had acquired were actually useful and needful in the current environment in South Africa. So I kind of used that as a jumping off to get the required visas that I needed. So I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, after all, you still were working in the retail space and you got the whole experience of how it is to be a pharmacist that works behind the counter. So can you tell us about that experience?
Yes, that's a good question. Thanks for asking that. So the legislation currently actually allows students to work a maximum number of hours. Back then, at least, that was the case. And I can't remember the exact amount of time that you were allowed to work. So what I did was, in an attempt to really try and understand my environment a little bit better, was I networked with a lot of people who were already working in pharmacies as students. And what the pharmacy degree offers you is the opportunity to work in a retail pharmacy, but as a pharmacist assistant, and it was paid work. It wasn't a lot of money, but I think for me, the value was really the experience. So what I did was, from my second year of study, I kind of connected with people who worked in a pharmacy, and I learned how to get into the system, and I met a lot of managers who interviewed me, and sort of I got an opportunity to actually get a job at a pharmacy, a retail pharmacy, and I basically worked from my second year onwards right up to my postgraduate studies. And I mean, the learnings that I got from that were fantastic. Firstly, I got hands-on experience in terms of, what a pharmacist actually does. I witnessed it, etc., etc. But beyond that, I think it really shaped my perceptions in terms of what I wanted to do beyond, when I had completed my studies. And right from there, I could sense that retail pharmacy wasn't a really good fit for me. And this is kind of what drew me on to, okay, what other options do I have? And my encouragement to the viewers and the listeners who have this opportunity, it might not be in a pharmacy, it might actually be at the university, to be a tutor or to be an assistant or whatever the case. Take up those opportunities, because I think they're very formative and important to giving you a sense of what you want to do later on. So that was a very important time for me. It was a really important space in my life where I could figure out, okay, retail is not, exactly what I want to do. I'm kind of interested in something else.
I think it's a very important lesson, because a lot of people think that everybody has it all figured out, and we go to university, we have this idea, okay, a scientist can pipe it, a pharmacist can give pills out, but the actual truth is that the skills that we are learning, it's something that just builds the ground, the foundation, but it can
Yeah,
be used in different spaces. So can you tell
absolutely.
us when was that spark, the ignition of that spark, that you actually can do something different than just being a retail pharmacist?
Yeah, cool. So I must commend the universities firstly to say that they do try and really give a lot of exposure in terms of what options you have. But I think ultimately the initiative really lies with the student, right? To step out and really do the research and say, okay, what other options do I have out there? Well, who can I talk to? Who can I speak to? Who can I reach out to give me more insight? So for me, this kind of aha moment came to me when I was busy with my master's degree, as I mentioned, and a couple of friends and myself were invited to a symposium at a neighboring university. And we just saw on the invite that they had gotten some speakers from a global organization called Novartis. We didn't really know a lot about it at the time, but we decided to go because we were curious and we wanted to find out. So basically, the symposium was focused on the kind of studies that Novartis does, or rather, upskilling of African talent in a particular domain called pharmacokinetics. And beyond the learnings in the science, I think what we took out of that was, for the first time, we saw scientists and pharmacists and doctors, right, who were working in industry and were doing really amazing things, with science, and they were having an impact not just locally but globally as well, because the team that had actually come was actually constituted of a global team, right? There were guys from Germany, there were guys from Switzerland, there was guys from Zimbabwe, interesting enough. So I think their team leader, who was the gentleman from Zimbabwe, was actually a highlight because he was very charismatic. And after the talk, right, a lot of people flocked to him to try and understand what his journey was like. And I think for the first time, for myself and my colleagues, we kind of really identified with somebody working in a space that we also wanted to be part of. And I think that was the moment I kind of decided that industry seems really, really interesting, and I'm sort of going to bend my energies towards trying to get myself into that space. So I think that was really the spark that kind of lit and propelled me into industry, and really sparked my interest in it, but specifically Novartis, right? Because I was kind of really inspired by the purpose which was driving the organization.
Well, that sounds great, but I wanted to ask you, what actually were hurdles that you came across while trying to
Mm.
transfer from your research masters to actually working for industry? Because I know that it's not, a linear
Mm.
journey, and it can be quite
Yeah.
difficult sometimes.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's a really good question, and I think everybody's going to face this in one form or another. But I think it's particularly difficult to, to step into industry without experience, right? Because I think currently the market requires, or companies require, professionals who've had hands-on experience. The problem is when you're starting out, you can't get that experience if you've not been employed before. So I think that was the initial challenge that I faced, trying to transition from an academic background into industry. There weren't a lot of entry level opportunities for me to, step into without any experience. And at the time, my particular interest was regulatory affairs. And every recruiter that I spoke to gave me the same very resounding message that without prior experience, you can't just jump from research into the regulatory affairs space. I see you shaking your head. Is that something you know about as well?
Yes, I mean,
Yeah.
most of the job advertisements, they will require some level of experience from
Yeah.
students, and that's so
Mm,
difficult because we don't really have that while we are at the university, at least
yeah.
not in a way that they are advertising. So we don't have
Yeah.
experience, let's say, in industry, in
Mm,
drug development, in your case, for instance.
yeah. Yeah.
So that's difficult to overcome.
Yeah, definitely. So that's a good point, Martina. But I think what I might add to that is to say that the kind of skills that you learn in research, can actually overlap with the skills that industry is looking for. But you need to be able to recognize the language. And I do admit that the extent of experience that you get in research is oftentimes not exactly enough to actually fulfill the criteria that they are looking for. And this was what I found in my own experience as well, because I found that even though I did have the problem solving skills, I had the perseverance, but I didn't have the more practical skills that they were looking for. So how did I approach this? So what I did very early on was I began to reach out to companies, right, to try and understand firstly what exactly are you looking for, number one. Number two, how can I bridge that gap, right, between academia and industry? What specific programs do you have to help me to do this? And I must say that most of the time I didn't get any response sometimes. But I do remember one head of regulatory affairs one head of regulatory affairs who was also a pharmacist at the time, who responded to an email which I sent to her. And I mean, she didn't have to. She didn't know me. I didn't know her. But I think the important point to take from this is that if you are a scientist, if you are a pharmacist, a nurse, or a doctor, or whoever, right, who's trying to step into that space of industry, it's so important to be assertive and to put yourself out there and to tap into the resources which you have. So at the time, LinkedIn wasn't a big thing, right? So then it was just email or calls, right? And I used that to the maximum ability that I could. So I emailed a lot of people, and this one lady responded, and she shared her journey with me and basically told me, look, I don't have any opportunities now for entry level, people, but here are the things that you could do. And she gave me really concrete, practical advice about, okay, there are courses that you can take, right? There are people that you can reach out to. There are companies, specific companies that are more inclined to actually take on people who don't have enough experience. So I think that response emboldened me. Number one, it gave me, confidence to say, okay, so this is actually doable. Because she did share, her journey and said, look, I was in retail for 10 years and I made that shift after that. And she just, really outlined the difficulties and the challenges associated with that. So that was a really important point in my journey, because after that, I was even more, motivated to reach out. But beyond that, and more practically, I also had the fortunate opportunity of actually reaching out to a former mentor of mine who I had met during my years at university, during my master's, and she had such an interesting journey. So she had a PhD in immunology, and after some time decided to actually go back to undergraduate and actually do a pharmacy degree because she was passionate about it and she liked it, etc. And I met her when she was on that journey, and we began talking, and later on I kept in touch with her. So by the time I was now sending out emails and reaching out to people, she had actually rejoined industry, and she was now a head of regulatory affairs at one of the pharmaceutical companies that I was reaching out to. And I was fortunate enough to reach out to her and say, "Hey, my name is Eugene. Do you remember me? We used to chat, etc." And she's like, "Absolutely, I remember you." And I told her, and I was honest, genuine, and I said, "Look, I'm looking to step into industry because I think that's a really great space for me. Do you have any advice? Do you have any jobs which you can actually take on a junior person who doesn't have experience?" And fortunately, she was actually willing to give me an opportunity to interview for a very low level job, right? And and I think what I learned from that was that networking and maintaining professional relationships is critical, number one. But number two, also the willingness to actually do your research and such that when the opportunity is given to you, you're kind of ready, right? So she gave me some time and said, "Look, do as much research as you can because it's obviously going to be an intense interview." But she didn't know that I had been researching about this for a long time already. So by the time the interview came, I was I was ready. I interviewed well. I got the job, and that was basically my entry into industry.
Okay,
Yeah.
so summarizing, you had quite a big perseverance. You were proactive. You were networking. You were reaching back to your network that you already had in your past. And
Yeah.
I believe that your reaching out wasn't very demanding. It was more like adding value, being polite in your
Mhm.
approach.
Mhm.
And you were also doing a lot of research on your side on the position that you wanted to do.
Yeah, absolutely, Martina. If there's one thing that I cannot overstate is I think what organizations are looking for are people that are willing to do the hard work in terms of doing the research about firstly the organization and also being clearer about what it is they want, right? Number one, and number two, what it is that they can offer, the value that they can add, right? And I think this is where Science Bridge plays a really important role as well, because I feel like those skills are not necessarily taught in the curriculums which we come from in science or in any other space. So I think that coaching aspect of trying or learning to articulate the value that you can add to an organization is something so important. And I learned this as a gradual process, reaching out to people and saying, okay, this doesn't work, this works well, and being able to be forthright, at some point to say, look, I'm actually looking for a job, right? And also, I think the humility aspect is important because at the time I was actually willing to take on, a learnership role, right? Which was, going to pay me below what, I was worth, etc. And I realized that the value of that experience in the learnership space was going to propel me, going forward. So I think, to all the listeners and viewers who are in that space, don't be shy firstly to network, but also don't be shy to be humble as well. You've got to be humble, right? And that was my learning, at least.
No,
Yeah.
that sounds very real, actually. It's not,
Mm,
some kind of
mm.
airy fairy story. It is a true story. But
Yeah.
then I want to ask you, because you first entered the space as a regulatory affair pharmacist, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
And now you're a medical information scientist. So
Yeah.
can you tell us more about those roles?
Yeah, absolutely. So my interest when I entered industry was, as you mentioned, regulatory affairs. So for those of you who don't really know a lot about this, I'll just give like a brief picture. So regulatory affairs focuses on submission of or compiling clinical and scientific data in in the required format to submit to regulatory authorities in South Africa, right? So that was my initial interest, and the learning curve going from not knowing how to do this to knowing how to do that is actually quite steep. And I think this is why industry is actually reluctant to actually take on people, right, who don't have experience, because it takes quite a bit of effort to get people up to that, level of proficiency. So the focus of RA in many ways is actually submitting dossiers of information to the regulator so that they can review and approve drugs in a particular country, right? So this is what I did for about 2 years at my first job, and at 2 years at Novartis as well. And it was such a fruitful experience. I learned a lot technically. And I mean, it's a really challenging and demanding role. And as I mentioned, there's a lot to learn in that space. But after that amount of time, I realized that, my interests were changing. So then I moved into the medical space. I got the opportunity to move into the medical affairs function. And the medical affairs function focus in many ways is really to try and bridge the gap between practicing healthcare professionals and healthcare professionals who are in the business of drug development, right? So that these two groups can have an interaction which is meaningful and useful, and obviously based on science about the drugs which are being manufactured by Novartis, and the physicians and the doctors and the nurses who are actually going to be using these drugs in practice. So that's generally speaking what the medical affairs function is about. But more specific to my role, and as you mentioned, my title is medical information specialist currently. And my role zooms in on making sure that the information that healthcare professionals have on the drugs that we manufacture and market is accurate, up to date, scientific. And this is all in response to questions that doctors have about our drugs. So my role is basically to provide information to HCPs, healthcare professionals, who have got questions about our drugs, and to provide them with the most up-to-date information that we have from the clinical trials, from the literature, etc. But beyond that, right, my role also encompasses making sure that we've got platforms in terms of websites, applications that actually make this data easily available to our HCPs, right? Because obviously the value that adds ultimately is that once doctors, nurses, etc., have up-to-date, accurate information about how to use our drugs, then the outcomes for patients will obviously improve. And ultimately that's what inspires me, because there's a direct link between what I do and the patient outcomes.
Now that
So in a
sounds
nutshell,
it sounds
that's it.
very interesting, but at the same time, I want to ask you, so you're not a salesperson,
Mm-hmm.
you are not a medical science liaison, and you are not a science communicator. However,
Mm-hmm.
all those roles kind of interact with each other and complement each other. So how those roles are different?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. So you're absolutely right. So my role isn't really the medical science liaison role. It's not the medical advisor role, and it's certainly not the rep role, right, which you mentioned. And I think the distinguishing factor between the rep role and the medical roles, which I mentioned just now, is to say that the focus of the medical rep is really a commercial one, right? So what that means is that the rep is, his primary focus is to bring information that is specific to the drugs which a particular company markets, right? So the studies that are associated with that, the outcomes, etc. However, the medical function, or the functions within the medical team, are more focused on the science, right? So they give an unbiased, holistic perspective, or the conversations at least are based on an unbiased, holistic perspective of the data which is available within a particular domain. It could be rheumatology, it could be psoriasis, it could be diabetes, etc. So the medical science liaison role specifically is about, associates who, who've got the appropriate background in science, going up and, having conversations with doctors on a disease area as a whole, and having, fair and balanced conversations about, the data, and what is the best treatment options, and where have we seen the best outcomes, etc. So I think broadly those are the distinctions that I can pick up. And then more specifically to my role, and I mean, you put it so well to say that my role really is a nice mixture of a lot of the medical function roles in terms of the MSL, the medical advisor, etc. But I would say, or I would add that, the real focus for me is making sure that I can provide information, not necessarily face to face, but, via email or via platforms to the HCPs or the doctors, nurses, etc., when they need it, right? And it's more of, it's a dynamic role, and as you said, it does touch on a lot of areas. I do sometimes do some face-to-face interactions. I either, going out to see a doctor or via a phone call, etc. But my primary focus is really, to provide, information either digitally via platforms, etc., email, and also making sure that, strategically, I'm involved in designing the platforms and the channels that we use to reach our doctors. So I
Okay.
think that's a nice summary, just to, give some
So
insight
if
around
you
that.
can go back now to your education,
Sure.
what elements of your education are assisting you nowadays with your current role? What is
Sure.
transferable, translatable?
Yeah. Definitely. Good question. So I think from a technical perspective, there's an immense value in going through the research process, whether it's at master's level or PhD level, because if you obviously, you'll remember that, one of the important bits about research is doing a good literature review. That's fundamental. It's really important. And, when you think about that a little bit deeper and you compare that to, what I currently do, a lot of what I currently do is really about digging deep into data and really understanding, what the clinical trial results mean for particular questions that the doctors might ask us about our drugs, right? And trying to draw out information that's going to be important to our doctors who are treating their patients based on the information which we have as an organization, whether in terms of the clinical trials data or the published data, etc. So I think from a technical perspective, that is one of the biggest sort of skills which are are transferable. And then I think more on the soft skills side, right? Or more of on the, soft skills side, I would say one of the important things that research taught me was perseverance. And I think we spoke about this already earlier, was, oftentimes, the research project doesn't go as it's planned, right? As we all know, and things go horribly wrong. And you basically need to improvise, think outside the box, and most importantly, persevere, right? So perseverance is a really important aspect of research. And those skills have been so useful, in the current space which I'm in, because internally my role interfaces with a lot of other functions, commercial functions, supply chain, etc. And a lot of the time, when we have these interactions, it's on the basis of a problem that we need to solve, right? And those learnings of problem solving, thinking outside the box, and being persistent, with an issue, have been really useful. And I think the last thing that I'll add on this is also communication, right? I think, as a researcher, as a scientist, one of the things that you learn to do, right, and fairly well if you're good at what you do, is to communicate complex information. And my role currently is precisely about that, right? It's really about trying to take or or trying to make sense of the clinical data that we have, and presenting it in a format that is quick and simple enough for the HCPs to actually pick up on it quickly and apply it very easily in in their practices. So I think generally there's a lot that can be transferred from your research experience into the into my role specifically. But I do think that it does take a lot of articulate, well, the ability to articulate the skills that you have and to match them up with the roles that you're applying for. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that the whole application process kind of proves that you are persistent and then that you're willing to learn, because as you said, it's quite a steep learning curve still from what you already learned at the university. That's your
Yeah,
ground, that's your base, but you still have much more
absolutely.
to learn. That's why you have to stay humble.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, definitely. I think I really can't add, any more to what you've said on that point, because that statement really does speak to, my experience. Perseverance, keep asking questions, and also just don't be afraid to reach out to, be audacious, right? I mean, the thought of me typing out an email to the head of regulatory affairs of a company at that point in time was intimidating. Like, okay, what am I going to say? But I think it's important to be bold. It's important to be, it's a weird line, because on one hand you're saying be humble, but on the other hand you're saying be bold, and those two things are not in conflict, right? You can be humble and still be bold, and I think that is really what you need if you really want to break into this space, because that's from my perspective what companies and organizations are looking for.
No, that sounds great. So do you have like a last advice that you would give to our viewers?
Yes, I do. So I think my journey has taught me the value of networking, right? I think it's so important to be able to reach out to people, and people maybe who not even are in, are in your industry or in your space, right? Because I think there's so much to learn, from people who have gone ahead of you and done this thing. So I've made it, a personal discipline to make sure that I reach out to, even random people on LinkedIn or via email, etc. So my general advice to, to people who are looking to break into the pharmaceutical industry is networking is critical. Be bold, reach out, join societies if you can find them. Do the courses, if you have to. But be curious, be bold, and network as much as you can, because I think that's where the opportunities come from. Yeah.
Okay, so on that note, we're gonna wrap it up. Be bold, guys, and stay humble at the same time. Thank you so much, Eugene, for this interview. I think that our viewers got plenty of information from you to learn. So I really appreciate. And where people could actually find you if they want to reach out to you.
Sure. So well, so firstly, I should say thank you for the opportunity. And again, I just want to reiterate the amazing work that, your company is doing, Science Bridge. I think the value of it cannot be overstated. So thanks for the opportunity. So if you want to chat more and reach out to me, I think the best way to do it would be through my LinkedIn profile. My advice to you is, when you do reach out, try and, be succinct and clear about, what your goals are, what you want to achieve. And, so I can, try and provide the best, input from my own experience as I can. Or if you just want to chat, that's also fine. Yeah. So I think my LinkedIn profile is the best.
Okay, so I will attach your LinkedIn details with this video. And please remember, when you are connecting with Eugene, add the note. Don't just send the invitation to connect. And
Very important.
be mindful and strategize your goals when you want to connect with Eugene. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks you so much, Mary. Cheers.
Cheers.